She was only 14 years old in a boarding school when her teacher got her pregnant and aborted the pregnancy, and it almost took her life. It's crazy what happens in this boarding house that our kids go to. You will not believe it until you watch this story. She was totally destroyed, but one thing saved her, and you will not believe what that thing was. You don't believe me, right? Watch the story.
The rain had been falling steadily that night, tapping gently against the rusted zinc roof of the small hospital building. Inside the dim maternity ward, a young girl lay trembling on a narrow hospital bed, gripping the metal rails with all the strength she had left. Oluchi was only 19. Her face was pale from exhaustion, strands of damp hair clinging to her forehead as the pain came in waves. Nurses moved around her quickly, their voices calm but firm, urging her to breathe, to push, to hold on just a little longer. Outside the ward, the world felt unbearably quiet. No husband paced the hallway, waiting anxiously. No family members stood outside praying for her strength. The father of the child had already vanished weeks ago, disappearing from Nigeria as if the life growing inside her had never existed. When Oluchi had told him she was pregnant, the man she loved did not shout or argue. He simply left. Within a month, he had relocated to Canada, cutting every line of communication between them. His promises, his affection, his vows of forever had evaporated like morning mist. For weeks after his departure, Oluchi had cried herself to sleep. Not just because she had been abandoned, but because everyone around her seemed to agree with his decision. Relatives came with advice that sounded more like instructions. "You're still young," one aunt had told her. "You can fix this mistake," another insisted. Others were more blunt. "Get rid of the pregnancy and continue your life." But every time Oluchi imagined that possibility, something deep inside her refused. The child inside her had done nothing wrong. And so, against the judgment of neighbors, relatives, and even friends, Oluchi made the most difficult decision of her life. She would keep the baby. Back in the hospital room, the nurse leaned over her. "One more push," she said gently. Oluchi screamed as pain surged through her body. Then suddenly the room filled with a sound that cut through the silence like light through darkness. A newborn's cry. The nurse lifted the tiny baby girl into the air, wiping her gently before wrapping her in a soft blanket. The child's skin glowed warm and caramel under the yellow hospital lights, her tiny fingers curling instinctively into the fabric. "She's beautiful," the nurse whispered. Oluchi's breathing slowed as they placed the baby in her arms. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The fear, the shame, the whispers, the abandonment, all of it faded into the background as Oluchi stared into the wide brown eyes of the little girl looking back at her. She traced the baby's cheek with trembling fingers. "You're not a mistake," she whispered softly. "You're my reason." She named her Adama. From that moment forward, Oluchi's life belonged to one purpose, giving her daughter a future no one believed she could provide. But love alone does not erase hardship. The early years were brutal. Oluchi's days were a blur of sleepless nights, crying babies, and relentless exhaustion. She woke before sunrise to prepare for school, carrying her daughter to a neighbor who agreed to babysit while she attended lectures. Many mornings she sat in class barely able to keep her eyes open. Some nights she stayed awake until dawn finishing assignments while Adama slept beside her in a small borrowed crib. Money was another constant battle. Without support from Adama's father, Oluchi had to survive on small jobs and favors. She typed essays for classmates, ran errands for neighbors, and occasionally tutored younger students just to earn enough money to keep food on the table. There were moments when the weight of responsibility nearly crushed her. Moments when she questioned whether everyone had been right about her. But every time she looked at Adama, something inside her hardened into determination. Failure was no longer an option. Years passed. Slowly, painfully, but steadily, Oluchi climbed forward. She finished her education, refusing to allow motherhood to derail her future. Her intelligence and discipline soon caught the attention of employers in the growing technology sector. What started as a small entry-level job eventually turned into something much greater. Oluchi became an IT analyst. Then, a respected one. With each promotion came better pay, better opportunities, and finally, a sense of stability she had fought for nearly a decade to achieve. She moved out of cramped apartments into a comfortable home. She replaced second-hand furniture with things she could proudly call her own. And most importantly, she gave Adama everything. Adama grew up surrounded by opportunities Oluchi had never imagined as a child. Beautiful clothes filled her closet. Toys arrived almost every birthday and holiday. And when it came time for school, Oluchi spared no expense. Her daughter would attend the best institutions available. But sometimes the love born from hardship becomes too generous. Oluchi had spent so many years fearing that Adama might feel abandoned that she rarely denied her anything. When Adama wanted something, Oluchi found a way to provide it. When Adama resisted discipline, Oluchi softened her tone. And slowly, without realizing it, she began raising a girl who believed the world would always bend around her desires. By the time Adama reached 14, she had grown into a strikingly beautiful teenager. Her caramel skin glowed effortlessly under sunlight. Her large brown eyes carried a mischievous sparkle that often hinted at the trouble she was about to cause. Her slender frame and graceful posture made her stand out even in crowded rooms. But along with beauty came stubbornness. Adama hated being told what to do. She disliked rules, routines, and authority. Teachers who attempted to discipline her often found themselves dealing with sarcastic remarks or silent defiance. Oluchi noticed these behaviors occasionally, but she believed structure would eventually correct them. And so she made a decision she hoped would guide her daughter toward maturity. She enrolled Adama in one of the most prestigious boarding schools in Abuja. The campus looked like something out of a dream. Tall academic buildings stood proudly among carefully trimmed gardens. The dormitories were modern and comfortable, designed to create an environment where students could focus entirely on their studies. Students there were expected to live by a strict schedule. Morning prep, afternoon classes, evening study hours, lights out. It was the kind of discipline Oluchi believed her daughter desperately needed. The day she dropped Adama off at the school gates, she hugged her tightly. "You have everything I never had," she said gently. "Don't waste it." Adama nodded, but her eyes wandered across the campus with visible irritation. To Oluchi, the school represented opportunity. To Adama, it felt like confinement. Within weeks, the complaints began. Teachers reported that Adama often skipped afternoon prep sessions. Sometimes she ignored siesta hours, choosing instead to gossip with classmates in the hostel. Other times, she refused to follow instructions during study periods. Soon, two other girls became her closest companions. Lucy, Annabelle. Both came from wealthy families and both shared Adama's disregard for rules. Together, they formed a trio that teachers quickly began recognizing for all the wrong reasons. Phone calls from the school became frequent. Each time Oluchi arrived to address the issue, she tried to remain calm. She would sit across from her daughter and ask the same painful question. "What more do you want from me?" She reminded Adama of the sacrifices she had made. The sleepless nights. The years of struggle. The dream she had carried for her daughter since the moment she first held her in that hospital room. But Adama rarely listened. Sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she rolled her eyes. And sometimes she said the words that hurt Oluchi the most. "I didn't ask you to do all that." Each visit ended the same way. Oluchi returned home with a heavy heart, praying that one day her daughter would understand how deeply she was loved. But inside the walls of that prestigious boarding school, something far more dangerous than teenage rebellion was quietly waiting. Someone was about to enter Adama's life. Someone who should have protected her. Someone who would change everything. The bell rang sharply across the compound, echoing through the long hallways of the prestigious boarding school in Abuja. Students moved quickly between buildings, their uniforms neat and identical, their footsteps forming a quiet rhythm against the tiled floors. From the outside, the school looked like the perfect place for discipline and academic excellence. Parents trusted it. Teachers respected it. Students were expected to thrive in it. But inside one of the senior dormitories, 3 girls were laughing loudly, completely ignoring the structured order that defined the school. Adama sat cross-legged on the lower bunk of her bed, twirling a strand of hair around her finger as Lucy and Annabelle leaned toward her, listening intently. "Tell me again what she said," Lucy asked, struggling to contain her laughter. Adama smirked. "She said if I skipped afternoon prep one more time, she would report me to the principal." Annabelle gasped dramatically. "Oh no, not the principal." The 3 girls burst into laughter. At 14 years old, Adama was already in SS3, preparing to write her senior secondary school examinations. She was far younger than most of her classmates, but intelligence had never been her problem. In fact, academically, Adama was brilliant. She grasped concepts quickly and rarely struggled with coursework. Teachers often admitted that if she applied herself properly, she could easily rank among the best students in the school. But Adama had a different priority: attention. She loved the feeling of being noticed wherever she went. Her caramel skin seemed to glow under the sunlight that poured through classroom windows. Her large brown eyes carried a bold confidence that many teachers found difficult to control. And when she walked across the school compound, heads often turned. Even other students noticed. "Adama thinks she's a celebrity," one girl once whispered during lunch. And perhaps in her own mind, she was. But beauty and confidence alone were not the problem. The real issue was discipline, or rather, the complete lack of it. From the moment Adama arrived at the boarding school, she had treated rules like obstacles designed specifically to annoy her. Morning assembly, afternoon prep, evening study, lights out. Every part of the schedule felt restrictive to her. Lucy and Annabelle had quickly become her closest allies in rebellion. Lucy came from a powerful political family. Annabelle's father owned several successful businesses across Abuja. Both girls had grown up with privilege and very little supervision. Together, the 3 formed a powerful alliance. They skipped afternoon prep sessions whenever they could. Instead of studying, they would hide in the dormitory, whispering gossip about other students or discussing the latest rumors circulating across campus. Sometimes they wandered the school grounds during siesta hours, ignoring instructions from prefects who tried to send them back to their rooms. Other times, they simply refused to participate in scheduled activities altogether. Teachers quickly began noticing the pattern. At first, they tried gentle warnings. "Adama, you're too intelligent to behave like this," one mathematics teacher told her one afternoon. Adama simply smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am." The next day, she skipped prep again. Soon, the situation escalated. Reports were filed, prefects complained, teachers raised concerns. And almost every week, the school administration found themselves making the same phone call. "Mrs. Oluchi, we need you to come to the school." The first time Oluchi received the call, she assumed it was a small misunderstanding. But by the 3rd and 4th visit, she began realizing something was seriously wrong. Each time she arrived at the school, she walked through the same quiet administrative corridor, her heart heavy with disappointment. The principal would explain the latest incident while Oluchi listened in silence. Skipping classes, disrespecting authority, ignoring school rules. It was always something. Eventually, Oluchi would ask to see her daughter. Adama would walk into the office slowly, her expression calm and unreadable. Oluchi would study her face for a moment before speaking. "Adama," she would say softly, "why are you doing this?" Her voice was never angry. It was tired. The exhaustion of a mother who had sacrificed everything for her child. She would remind Adama of the years she had struggled to raise her alone. She would talk about the sleepless nights she spent studying while caring for a baby. She would explain how hard she had worked just to give her daughter opportunities she herself had never had. "I'm doing my best for you," she would say. "Why are you making things harder?" For a brief moment, silence would fill the room. Then Adama would lean back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're the one who put me here," she would reply. "I didn't ask to come to this school." Oluchi would blink slowly, as if the words had physically struck her. "This school is one of the best in Abuja," she would say gently. "That's not my problem." Sometimes Adama would laugh. Sometimes she rolled her eyes. And sometimes she said something even worse. "You're forcing me to live the life you want, not the life I want." The words always left Oluchi speechless. She had spent 14 years trying to build a better future for her daughter. But somehow, the child she loved more than anything in the world seemed completely blind to those sacrifices. Each meeting ended the same way. Oluchi would walk back to her car slowly, her shoulders slightly slumped under the weight of disappointment. She always hoped that maybe, just maybe, Adama would eventually understand. That maturity would come with time. But inside the boarding school walls, Adama's behavior was only getting worse. Lucy and Annabelle continued encouraging her rebellion. The three girls began developing a reputation across campus. Notorious. Teachers watched them carefully. Prefects whispered about them during patrol rounds. Even younger students recognized their names. Yet none of this seemed to bother Adama. If anything, she enjoyed the attention. Because attention had always been something she craved. And soon, someone new would arrive at the school. Someone who would notice her. Someone whose attention would change everything. At first, it would seem harmless. Just a new face. A young teacher assigned to assist with extra lessons for senior students preparing for their examinations. But the moment he walked into Adama's classroom, something would happen. Something that neither of them would be able to control. And the consequences of that moment would follow them for years to come. Daniel arrived at the school on a Tuesday afternoon, when the Abuja sun was high and the senior students were already tired of extra lessons. The SS3 classroom was noisy before he entered. Chairs scraped against the floor. Students whispered behind open textbooks. Some were pretending to revise mathematics, while others had already surrendered to boredom. Then the door opened. Daniel stepped in with a brown folder under his arm and a nervous confidence in his shoulders. He was 24, freshly done with university, wearing the khaki trousers and plain shirt that marked him as a youth corps member. He looked young enough to be approachable, but old enough to command attention. "Good afternoon, class," he said. The room answered lazily. He smiled. "My name is Daniel. I'll be assisting with your mathematics revision until your exams." Adama looked up. At first, it was only curiosity. Then their eyes met and Daniel paused for half a second too long. He quickly turned to the board. But Adama noticed. She always noticed attention. She sat in the front row that day, her notebook open, her pen still between her fingers. She was 14, brilliant, restless, and far too used to getting what she wanted. To the other teachers, she was trouble. To her mother, she was a child who needed discipline. But to herself, Adama felt older than everyone believed. Daniel began teaching quadratic equations, but his voice occasionally faltered whenever his eyes moved toward her side of the room. He corrected himself each time, forcing his attention back to the board. He knew better. He knew she was a student. He knew he was there to teach, not to notice. But knowing a line existed was not the same as respecting it. After class, Adama remained seated while the other students rushed out. Lucy stopped by the door. "Adama, let's go." "I'm coming," Adama said, still looking at Daniel. Daniel arranged his papers without meeting her eyes. "Sir," she said. He looked up. "Yes?" "You teach better than the others." It was a simple sentence, but she said it with confidence. Daniel gave a small, uncomfortable smile. Thank you. Just make sure you pay attention in class. I was paying attention. I hope so. She smiled and left. That should have been the end of it. It was not. The first letter came 2 days later. Daniel found it inside his folder after evening lessons. A folded sheet of paper slipped between attendance records and lesson notes. He frowned, opened it, and saw Adama's handwriting. It was short. She said she liked the way he taught. She said mathematics felt less boring when he explained it. She said he did not look like the other teachers. Daniel folded the letter immediately. No, he whispered to himself. The next day, he avoided looking at her in class. But Adama took his silence as a challenge. Another letter came. Then another. Each one became more personal. She asked about his life, his dreams, where he grew up, whether he liked teaching. Daniel kept telling himself not to respond. He threw one letter away. He kept another in his drawer. He ignored the third. But the fourth letter was different. It arrived on a Friday afternoon just before the school compound settled into the slow rhythm of evening prep. Daniel found it inside his work bag when he got back to the small apartment he shared with other corps members. The envelope had no name on it, but he knew. He sat on the edge of his bed and opened it slowly. Then he began reading. Dear Daniel, I know you have been avoiding me. I know you pretend not to see me in class anymore, even when I know you do. I know you look away because you think that is the right thing to do. Maybe it is. Maybe you are stronger than I am. But I need to say this because keeping it inside me is making me restless. The first day you walked into our class, everyone saw a new mathematics teacher, but I saw someone different. I saw someone who carried himself like he belonged somewhere bigger than that classroom. You were tall, calm, and serious, but not in the harsh way the other teachers are. You looked like someone who had dreams he had not said out loud yet. And when you stood by the board, I could not stop watching you. I know I should be thinking about exams. I know I should be focused on my books. That is what everyone keeps saying. But whenever you are in front of the class, I forget the noise around me. I forget Lucy and Annabelle are whispering beside me. I forget I am supposed to be angry at this school. I just see you. And I hate that you act like you do not feel anything. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I am embarrassing myself, but sometimes when our eyes meet, even for a second, I feel like you are trying to hide from something too. I am not writing this because I want to cause trouble for you. I am writing because I do not know what else to do with how I feel. When I look at you, I feel nervous and bold at the same time. I feel like I want to talk to you for hours, even if we are only talking about ordinary things. I feel like you are the only person in this school who sees me as something more than a troublesome student. Maybe that is foolish. Maybe you will never reply. But I want you to know that I think about you more than I should. And sometimes I wish the world was different enough for me to say these things without fear. Adama. Daniel lowered the letter. The room was quiet except for the distant sound of music from another corps member's radio. Outside, motorcycles passed along the road. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. But Daniel sat completely still. He read the letter again. Then a third time. Each time, the warning in his mind became louder. She is a student. She is too young. This is wrong. He stood up suddenly and paced the room, gripping the paper in his hand. He should report it. He should take it to the principal. He should request to stop teaching her class. He should create distance immediately. There were many right choices available to him. But temptation often begins when a person starts arguing with the truth. She's just confused, he told himself. Then another thought followed. But she understands me. He hated that thought. He knew it was selfish. He knew it was dangerous. He knew that Adama's boldness did not make her an adult. She was still a child under his care, no matter how confidently she wrote, no matter how mature she sounded, no matter how beautiful or fearless she seemed. But Daniel did not do the responsible thing. That night, he opened his notebook. For several minutes, he stared at the blank page. Then he began to write. Not much. just enough to cross the line. Adama, I read your letter. You should not be writing to me this way and I should not be replying. I know that. But I would be lying if I said your words did not affect me. You are intelligent, bold, and impossible to ignore. I need you to focus on your exams, but I also need you to know that I hear you. This must remain between us. Daniel? When he finished, he stared at the words with shame. He knew the letter was wrong. He knew "this must remain between us" was the most dangerous sentence of all. Still, the next day, he placed it inside Adama's textbook during extra class. Adama found it before evening prep. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her eyes moved quickly across the page. By the time she reached the end, a smile appeared on her face. Lucy noticed immediately. "What is that?" "Nothing," Adama said, folding it. Annabelle leaned closer. "Adama." Adama slipped the paper into her pocket. "I said it's nothing." But it was not nothing. It was the beginning of secrecy. After that, the letters became regular. Adama wrote at night after lights out, hiding beneath her blanket with a small torch. Daniel replied carefully, always pretending to be cautious, always reminding her that things had to remain private. In public, he was the young mathematics instructor helping an SS3 student prepare for exams. In secret, he was becoming emotionally entangled with a child he was supposed to protect. Whenever Adama struggled with mathematics, he offered private help. Whenever she wanted to see him, he created excuses. Whenever students noticed the closeness, he dismissed it as academic support. Lucy and Annabelle were the first to confront her. "Adama, this thing is not normal," Lucy whispered one night. Adama rolled her eyes. "You don't understand." Annabelle shook her head. "If your mother finds out, she will faint." "She won't find out." "And if the principal finds out?" "She won't find out either." But secrets have a way of growing heavier. Daniel began waiting for Adama after lessons. Adama began looking for reasons to pass near the staff room. Their conversations became longer, quieter, and more dangerous. The school continued functioning around them. Bells rang. Teachers taught. Students revised. Oluchi worked in Abuja, believing her daughter was preparing for exams inside a safe school. But inside that school, a boundary had already been broken. And once Daniel replied to that letter, everything changed. Not loudly, not immediately, but quietly, like a crack spreading across glass. A teacher who should have known better had chosen secrecy over responsibility. And a girl who thought she was chasing love was walking straight into a storm she was too young to understand. The rumor reached Adama during evening prep. She was sitting at the back of the classroom with her mathematics textbook open in front of her, but her mind was nowhere near equations. Lucy was pretending to solve past questions beside her, while Annabelle had her chin in her palm, staring at the wall like the numbers on the board had personally offended her. Then one of the senior girls whispered it. "The core members are having a party tonight." Adama's pen stopped moving. The girl lowered her voice, enjoying the attention. "Outside school, somewhere close to town. I heard them talking near the staff room." Lucy glanced at Adama immediately. She already knew that look. That spark. That dangerous curiosity. Adama leaned back slowly, her heart beginning to beat faster. She tried to look uninterested, but inside her something had already awakened. Daniel had mentioned earlier that day that some of the youth corps members were organizing a small gathering. He had not invited her directly, but he had said it with a smile that stayed in her mind. "It would be boring without you," he had murmured as he handed back her exercise book. At the time, Adama had laughed it off. Now, the sentence felt like an invitation. By the time prep ended, her decision was made. Inside the hostel, the girls changed into their nightwear as the matron moved from room to room, checking beds and warning students to sleep early. The air smelled of body lotion, soap, and the faint dust of old wooden lockers. Adama sat on her bed, unusually quiet. Lucy watched her suspiciously. "No," Lucy said. Adama looked up. "I haven't even said anything." "You don't have to, I already know that face." Annabelle sat up from her bunk. Adama, please don't start. Adama smiled. We're going out tonight. Lucy dropped the comb in her hand. You were joking. I'm not. To where? Annabelle asked, even though she already feared the answer. The party. The room went still. For a moment, only the distant sound of students whispering in another room filled the silence. Lucy shook her head. Absolutely not. Adama rolled her eyes. Why are you acting like we're going to another country? Because we are in boarding school, Annabelle whispered sharply. Do you understand what happens if they catch us? They won't catch us. You always say that. And have they caught us? Lucy folded her arms. This is not skipping prep. This is leaving school at night. Adama stood and opened the bottom of her box. Beneath folded uniforms and towels, she pulled out the clothes she had smuggled from home. Lucy's eyes widened. You planned this? I planned for possibilities, Adama said with a grin. Annabelle looked frightened. Adama, your mother will kill you. My mother won't know. She will if something goes wrong, Lucy said. Adama's smile softened. She moved closer and sat between them, lowering her voice. Please, just come with me. I don't want to go alone. Lucy looked away, already weakening. Adama knew exactly how to push further. When my allowance comes, I'll buy both of you anything you want. And you can take whatever you like from my provisions until visiting day. Annabelle sighed. You are a terrible person. But you love me. Lucy pointed at her. If we get expelled, I will never forgive you. We won't. But even as Adama said it, something inside her trembled. Not fear exactly. Excitement wearing the face of fear. When lights out finally came, the hostel sank into silence. The matron's footsteps passed down the corridor once, then twice. Doors creaked. A torchlight swept briefly under the cracks of rooms. Students held their breath beneath blankets, pretending to sleep. Adama waited until the compound became completely quiet. Then she sat up. Lucy and Annabelle followed, their movements stiff with fear. The three girls slipped into the bathroom with their hidden clothes, changing quickly and whispering warnings at each other. Walk softly. Don't laugh. If anybody calls our name, I'm fainting. Adama nearly laughed, but Lucy covered her mouth. They crept out through the back of the hostel, moving close to the wall. The school compound looked different at night. The same buildings that felt ordinary during the day now seemed tall and watchful. Security lights glowed over the walkways, casting long shadows across the ground. When they reached the fence, Annabelle froze. I can't do this. Adama grabbed her hand. Yes, you can. Lucy climbed first, muttering prayers under her breath. Annabelle followed, shaking. Adama climbed last, her heart pounding as her feet touched the ground on the other side. Daniel was waiting beneath a tree. The sight of him made Adama forget everything else. He looked nervous, his hands tucked into his pockets, his face half hidden by darkness. When he saw her, relief crossed his expression before worry replaced it. You came, he said. Adama smiled. You thought I wouldn't? Daniel glanced at Lucy and Annabelle. This is dangerous. Lucy gave him a hard look. Then why are you here? Daniel had no answer. That silence should have been enough to make Adama turn back. But she did not. They walked quickly toward the road, where a taxi waited. Inside the vehicle, Annabelle sat stiffly. Lucy kept looking through the back window, and Adama sat beside Daniel with her hands pressed tightly together, trying to hide how alive she felt. The party was held in a rented apartment not too far from the school. Music spilled from open windows. Laughter rose into the warm night. Core members moved in and out of the rooms carrying drinks, dancing, shouting over the beat. To Lucy and Annabelle, it was overwhelming. To Adama, it was magic. No school bell. No matron. No principal. No mother. For the first time in a long while, she felt like no one controlled her. Daniel stayed close to her all night. Too close. He introduced her vaguely when people asked questions, saying only that she was a friend. Adama noticed the hesitation, but instead of feeling alarmed, she felt important. Music filled the room. Someone pulled Lucy into a dance. Annabelle began laughing despite herself. Adama stood beside Daniel, watching the world blur into lights, sound, and movement. "You shouldn't have come," Daniel said quietly. She looked up at him. "But you're happy I did." He looked away. That was always Daniel's weakness. He knew the right thing to say, but not the right thing to do. As the night deepened, the excitement became heavier. The laughter became careless. The boundaries Daniel was supposed to protect became easier for him to ignore. Adama, young and blinded by attention, mistook secrecy for love and danger for romance. And before the night ended, something happened between them that changed everything. By the time the girls returned toward the school, the sky was still dark but no longer peaceful. Fear had replaced the thrill. Their footsteps were hurried. Their whispers were sharp. Every shadow looked like a witness. Near the hostel, they heard movement. The matron. Lucy gripped Adama's wrist. "Run!" They slipped through the bathroom entrance just as footsteps approached the corridor. Their hands shook as they changed back into nightwear, hiding the clothes behind a broken bucket. When the matron entered, her torchlight flashed across their faces. "What are the three of you doing here?" Adama yawned dramatically. "We came to ease ourselves, Ma." "At the same time?" Annabelle rubbed her eyes. "We were awake." The matron stared for a long moment. Suspicion sat heavily in the room, but there was no proof. "Go back to bed." They obeyed. But Adama did not sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her body still carrying the noise of the party, her mind replaying the night in broken pieces. She told herself she was happy. She told herself Daniel loved her. She told herself everything was under control. But something inside her felt wrong. Days passed. Then 2 weeks. Adama began to change. She was tired all the time. In class, her head would drop suddenly over her book. Food made her uneasy. She snapped at Lucy for asking too many questions and avoided Annabelle whenever she looked too concerned. One afternoon, after she nearly fainted during prep, Lucy pulled her aside. "Adama, tell Daniel." Adama's face tightened. "Tell him what?" "You know what?" Adama's hands went cold. When she finally told Daniel, his reaction terrified her more than anything else. He went pale. He paced. He asked the same questions again and again, as if asking them could change the answer. Then he said the words that made Adama feel smaller than she had ever felt. "No one must know." She stared at him. "I'm scared." "I'll handle it. I want my mother." "No." His voice was sharp. Then he softened it quickly. "Adama, listen to me. If your mother finds out everything is finished, your school, my service year, your future, everything." Tears filled her eyes. "What do we do?" Daniel looked away. Then he made another decision he had no right to make. A dangerous one. He arranged her to leave the school secretly again. This time, there was no music waiting outside, no laughter, no feeling of freedom. Only a cold silence that followed her from the hostel to the gate, and from the gate into the night. By the time Adama returned, she looked different. Not older. Broken. She told Lucy and Annabelle not to ask questions, but they knew something terrible had happened. The next morning, Adama could barely stand. By afternoon, she was in pain. By evening, she was bleeding. Lucy panicked first. Annabelle ran for help, crying as she called the matron. Adama tried to speak, but her voice came out weak and frightened. The school clinic could not manage the situation. Within minutes, the principal was called. Then the hospital. Then Oluchi. When Oluchi arrived, she was not the composed, successful IT analyst everyone knew. She rushed through the hospital doors like a woman whose soul had been set on fire. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded. No one could calm her. When the doctor finally explained what had happened, Oluchi stood completely still. Her face went blank, as if the words had struck her so deeply that her body forgot how to react. Then she walked into the room. Adama lay on the hospital bed, pale, weak, and terrified. For the first time, she did not look proud. She did not look stubborn. She looked 14, a child. Oluchi sat beside her slowly, her hands trembling as she touched Adama's fingers. Adama began to cry. "Mommy." That single word broke something inside Oluchi. Because after all the rebellion, all the arrogance, all the fights, Adama was still her baby. The child she had carried alone. The child she had fought the world to protect. And now, because of a secret hidden behind school walls, she had almost lost her. Outside that hospital room, Daniel's world was already beginning to collapse. But inside, Oluchi stared at her daughter through tears, knowing that nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold air. Machines hummed softly beside the bed. A thin curtain hung half open by the window, allowing pale afternoon light to spill across the white sheets where Adama lay motionless. She looked smaller than she had ever looked in Oluchi's memory. The girl who once walked through life with stubborn pride now seemed fragile, almost breakable. Her caramel skin had lost its glow. Her lips were dry. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Oluchi sat beside the bed in complete silence. Her hands were clasped tightly together in her lap, her knuckles pale from the pressure. Anyone who walked into that room would have seen a mother sitting quietly beside her child. But inside Oluchi, a storm was raging. The doctor's words still echoed in her mind. If you had arrived any later, the damage could have been permanent. Permanent. The word had struck her like a blade. For years, Oluchi had feared many things. She had feared poverty when she was a teenage mother. She had feared failure when she struggled through school. She had feared loneliness when she raised Adama without help. But she had never imagined she would sit in a hospital room like this, watching her daughter nearly lose her life because of something that should never have happened. Adama shifted slightly on the bed. Her eyes opened slowly, and when she saw her mother sitting there, tears immediately filled them. "Mommy." Her voice was weak. Oluchi didn't answer right away. She stared at her daughter for a long moment, as if trying to recognize the child she had raised. The silence stretched painfully between them. Then finally, Oluchi spoke. Her voice trembled. "What have I not done for you?" The words hung in the air like broken glass. Adama's lips trembled. Oluchi leaned forward slightly, her eyes burning with emotion. "What have I not done for you, Adama?" Her voice rose, thick with heartbreak. "I carried you alone when everyone told me not to. I went back to school while raising a baby. I worked day and night so you could have everything I never had." Tears began to fall down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. "I gave you the best schools, the best life, the best opportunities." Her voice cracked. "And this is what you did with it?" Adama covered her face with her hands and began to cry. The sound filled the small hospital room. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. Oluchi shook her head slowly. "Sorry?" she whispered. "You almost died." Adama's shoulders shook as she cried harder. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered through her tears. Oluchi closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady herself. "Tell me everything." Adama hesitated. For a moment, fear passed through her expression. The truth felt too heavy, too shameful to say out loud. But something about her mother's voice told her there was no hiding anymore. So she began. She spoke slowly at first, her voice trembling. She told Oluchi about Daniel, about the day he arrived at the school, about the letters she had written, about the way they had begun meeting secretly under the excuse of mathematics lessons. Each confession seemed to drain more strength from her body. Oluchi listened without interrupting. But with every sentence, her face hardened. When Adama reached the part about the party, Oluchi's hands tightened around the edge of the chair. "You left the school at night?" she said quietly. Adama nodded, unable to look at her. "With him waiting outside the gate?" Another nod. "And he let you?" The question came out sharper this time. Adama wiped her eyes. I begged him. Oluchi's voice dropped into a cold whisper. He is a grown man. Adama broke down again. I didn't know what I was doing. Oluchi stared at her daughter for a long moment. She saw something she had not seen before. Not rebellion. Not arrogance. Fear. Adama was still just a child. A child who had been reckless, yes, stubborn, yes, but still a child who had trusted someone older to protect her. And that person had failed her. Oluchi stood up slowly. Her movements were calm now. Too calm. Rest, she said quietly. Adama looked up. Mommy. I said rest. There was something in her tone that made Adama stop speaking. Oluchi walked out of the hospital room without another word. But inside her chest, the anger had transformed into something far more dangerous. Determination. The next morning, Oluchi walked into the school compound like a woman on a mission. Teachers who saw her immediately stepped aside. The principal's secretary tried to greet her politely, but Oluchi walked straight past the desk and pushed open the office door. The principal looked up in surprise. Mrs. Oluchi. Call him. The principal frowned. Call who? The teacher. Her voice was steady. Daniel. Within minutes, Daniel was standing inside the office. The moment he saw Oluchi, he froze. She studied him carefully. He looked smaller than she had imagined. Younger, too. Not the monster she had built in her mind overnight. But that did not soften her anger. You, she said quietly. Daniel lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. Don't. Her voice sliced through the room. You will not insult me by apologizing before I finish speaking. The principal shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Oluchi stepped closer to Daniel. You were sent here to teach children. Daniel swallowed. Yes, Ma. You were trusted. Yes, Ma. You were given responsibility. His voice dropped to a whisper. Yes, Ma. Oluchi's eyes burned into his. And you chose to betray it. The room went silent. Daniel could not look up. Oluchi turned toward the principal. I want him reported. The principal hesitated. Mrs. Oluchi, perhaps we should discuss. No. Her voice was firm. He will be reported to the National Youth Service Corps, Ma. The principal sighed slowly. Within hours, the process had begun. The school administration launched an investigation. Statements were taken, reports were filed, evidence was gathered. Daniel's service year was terminated. He was ordered to leave the school immediately, and his record would forever carry the stain of what he had done. Oluchi did not attend the final meeting. She had already moved on to the next decision. Adama would never return to that boarding school. Within days, Oluchi completed the withdrawal process and enrolled her daughter in a small day school where she could finish preparing for her senior secondary examinations under close supervision. But even that did not feel like enough. The environment that had allowed everything to happen still surrounded them. The memories were everywhere. The whispers. The judgment. The shame. So Oluchi made one final decision. Adama would leave Nigeria. She contacted relatives abroad and arranged for her daughter to continue her education in Canada. A fresh start. A new environment. A chance to rebuild her future far away from the mistakes that had nearly destroyed it. When Adama finally recovered enough to leave the hospital, Oluchi sat beside her one evening and explained the plan. You're going to Canada, she said quietly. Adama blinked in surprise. Canada? Yes. Adama's voice trembled. You're sending me away? Oluchi looked at her carefully. I'm saving you. For the first time in weeks, Adama did not argue. She simply nodded. And as Oluchi watched her daughter sitting there, quiet and humbled, she realized something painful. The rebellious girl who had once laughed at her warnings was gone. In her place sat a young girl who had finally learned that some mistakes change everything. And Oluchi would spend the rest of her life making sure that mistake did not destroy her daughter's future. Winter had a quiet way of changing people. When Adama first arrived in Canada, the cold had shocked her more than anything else. The wind cut through coats like knives, the streets were unfamiliar, and the silence of a new country made her feel small in ways she had never experienced before. But years had passed since then. Now, as she walked across the university campus with a stack of mechanical engineering textbooks pressed against her chest, Adama moved with the confidence of someone who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. The girl who once sneaked out of boarding school walls no longer existed. Life had forced her to grow up quickly. The past still lived somewhere inside her memories, but Canada had given her something she had desperately needed. Distance. Distance from the whispers. Distance from the scandal. Distance from the night that had almost destroyed her life. Mechanical engineering had not been an easy path. The courses were intense, the workload relentless, and the competition fierce. But Adama attacked every challenge with quiet determination. Every exam she passed felt like proof that her story was not defined by a mistake. She graduated near the top of her class. Her professors admired her discipline. Her classmates respected her intelligence. And when she received acceptance into a master's program to continue her studies, Oluchi cried over the phone. "My daughter," her mother said softly, "you've done well." Adama smiled as she ended the call that night. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself. It was during the first week of her master's program that everything changed again. The campus library was unusually quiet that evening. Students moved silently between rows of bookshelves, their faces lit by laptop screens and reading lamps. Adama sat at a long wooden table near the engineering section, reviewing notes for a robotics systems lecture. Her pen moved steadily across the page, her focus absolute. Until she felt it. That strange sensation of being watched. At first, she ignored it. But the feeling grew stronger. Slowly, she lifted her head and froze. Across the library, standing near the aisle of engineering journals, was a face she had not seen in years. Daniel. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them stretched like a thin thread ready to snap. Adama's heart pounded. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. It had been years. Years since the hospital room, since the investigation, since her mother had removed her from that life and sent her across an ocean. Yet here he was. Daniel looked older now. His hair was shorter, his posture more reserved. The confidence he once carried had been replaced by something quieter, something heavier. Regret. He walked slowly toward her table. Each step felt like it echoed across the entire library. When he finally stopped in front of her, his voice came out softer than she remembered. Adama. Hearing her name and his voice again stirred something complicated inside her chest. Daniel, she replied. They stood there for several seconds, unsure what to do next. Then Daniel spoke. I didn't expect to see you here. Adama nodded slowly. I didn't expect to see you anywhere. He gave a small, awkward smile. I'm studying here now, Master's in Applied Mathematics. Adama blinked in surprise. For real? He nodded. Yeah. A long silence followed. Finally, Daniel pulled out the chair across from her. May I sit? Adama hesitated. Then she nodded. They sat facing each other, two people connected by a history neither of them could pretend had never happened. Daniel exhaled slowly. I've thought about this moment many times, he admitted. What moment? The moment I would have to look you in the eyes again. Adama didn't respond. Daniel lowered his gaze briefly before speaking again. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they carried years of weight. I was the adult, he continued. You were a child. It was my responsibility to protect you, not drag you into something you didn't fully understand. Adama's fingers tightened around her pen. You didn't drag me, she said quietly. I pushed too, Daniel shook his head immediately. No. His voice was firm. You were 14. The words settled between them. I should have stopped it the moment it started. I should have reported the letters. I should have removed myself from the situation entirely, but instead, I kept replying. He looked at her again, his eyes filled with painful honesty. I failed you. Adama felt something inside her chest soften. For years, she had replayed the events of her teenage life with confusion and shame. Hearing Daniel say the words she had never fully understood helped untangle something in her mind. They talked for hours that night about the past. About the investigation. About the consequences Daniel faced after being reported. His service year had been terminated. His reputation had been damaged. For a long time, he struggled to rebuild his life. But eventually, he had returned to school. He had started again, just like she had. Over the next few months, their paths crossed often on campus. At first, their meetings were cautious. Then, they became familiar. Eventually, they began spending time together intentionally. This time, the relationship looked very different. Adama was no longer a rebellious teenager chasing attention. She was a grown woman with ambition, intelligence, and a clearer understanding of herself. Daniel was no longer a young man drifting through life without considering consequences. He had matured. Regret had forced him to. Their conversations became deeper. They discussed classes, research projects, and the strange feeling of building a future in a foreign country. And slowly, feelings returned. One evening, as they walked across campus under falling snow, Daniel stopped beside the frozen lake. I know I don't deserve a second chance, he said quietly. Adama looked at him. But I still want one. The honesty in his voice was impossible to ignore. Adama closed her eyes briefly before speaking. If this continues, she said, there will be rules. Daniel nodded immediately. Anything. You will meet my mother. He hesitated. Not out of resistance, out of fear, but he nodded. Okay. Months later, they boarded a flight to Nigeria together. The journey felt longer than it actually was. Daniel barely spoke during the flight. Adama knew why. Meeting Oluchi would not be easy. When they finally arrived at the family house, Oluchi greeted her daughter with a warm embrace. But the moment she saw Daniel standing behind Adama, her expression changed. Silence filled the room. Daniel stepped forward slowly. Ma, he said respectfully. Oluchi stared at him for a long moment. So you're the one? Daniel lowered his head. Yes, Ma. He explained everything. His mistakes, his regret, the years he had spent rebuilding his life, and finally the reason he had come. I love your daughter, he said. Oluchi listened without interrupting. When he finished speaking, she folded her arms slowly. I believe you are sorry, she said calmly. Daniel felt a brief flicker of hope. Then she continued. But my answer is no. The room went silent. You may be a better man today, Oluchi said firmly, but you were the man who nearly destroyed my daughter's life when she was 14. Daniel's chest tightened. I understand, he whispered. Oluchi looked at Adama gently. You deserve peace. You deserve someone who protected you from the beginning. Adama's eyes filled with tears, but deep down she understood. Some actions carried consequences that could never be erased. 2 weeks later, Adama returned to Canada alone. The city looked the same. The campus looked the same. But something inside her heart felt heavier. For a while, she believed her story had ended with that goodbye. She didn't know yet that life was preparing to introduce her to someone who would show her what love was supposed to feel like from the very beginning. Spring arrived quietly in Canada. The snow that had covered the city for months slowly melted into clear streams along the sidewalks. Trees that had once stood bare and lifeless began to grow small green leaves again, and students across the university campus moved through the warmer air with renewed energy. But for Adama, the season of change had come with something far more complicated than weather: heartbreak. Ever since she returned from Nigeria, where her mother had firmly refused Daniel's proposal, something inside her had shifted. The closure had been necessary, but it had not been easy. For weeks after returning to Canada, Adama kept to herself. She attended her lectures, completed her assignments, and spent long hours in the engineering laboratory working on her research projects. But outside of academics, her world felt strangely quiet. The relationship she once believed might redeem her past had ended with her mother's refusal. And deep down, she understood why. Daniel had been the first man who made her feel seen when she was young. But he had also been the man who should have protected her instead of allowing her to fall into something she could not understand at 14. Adama no longer blamed herself the way she once had. But the memory still carried weight. One afternoon after a long robotics seminar, Adama walked into the campus cafe to grab a coffee before returning to the lab. The cafe was crowded with students talking loudly, typing on laptops, and arguing over assignments. She stood in line quietly, scrolling through her phone. Then someone behind her spoke. "You look like someone who hasn't slept in 3 days." Adama turned. The man standing behind her was tall, broad-shouldered, and smiling in a way that felt disarmingly genuine. He had a calm presence about him, the kind that immediately made people feel comfortable. Adama raised an eyebrow. "That obvious?" He laughed softly. "Mechanical engineering?" She blinked. "How did you know? You're holding a robotics textbook and you look exhausted." Adama smiled slightly. "Fair point." The man extended his hand. "I'm Kevin." "Adama. Nice to meet you." That was how it started. Nothing dramatic. No electrifying moment like the one she once believed she had experienced years ago in a classroom back in Nigeria. Just a simple conversation in a university cafe. Over the next few weeks, Adama began seeing Kevin around campus more often. Sometimes they met while studying in the library. Other times they ran into each other outside lecture halls. Kevin was studying engineering management, a program that combined technology with leadership training. But what Adama noticed most about him was not his intelligence. It was his patience. Kevin never rushed conversations. He never pushed boundaries. He never made her feel like she had to prove anything. Instead, he listened. Really listened. One evening, while they walked slowly along the river path near campus, Kevin glanced at her. "You're careful with people," he said. Adama looked at him curiously. "What makes you say that?" "You watch people before you trust them." She shrugged. "Experience." Kevin nodded thoughtfully. "Fair enough." He never asked for details she wasn't ready to give. That respect slowly built something Adama had never experienced before: safety. With Daniel, everything had been secretive and rushed. Their relationship had been built in quiet corners, hidden letters, and dangerous excitement. With Kevin, everything was calm. Open, honest. Months passed, and and their friendship gradually grew into something deeper. Kevin supported her during stressful research deadlines. He stayed up late helping her review presentations. He celebrated every small success she achieved. And slowly, Adama realized something surprising. Love did not have to feel chaotic. It could feel peaceful. One evening, after a long day in the lab, Kevin invited her to dinner at a small restaurant near campus. The place was quiet with soft music playing in the background. As they finished eating, Kevin looked at her with unusual seriousness. "There's something I want to ask you." Adama smiled. "That sounds dangerous." Kevin chuckled. "I want to meet your mother." The words caught her off guard. "My mother?" "Yes." Adama hesitated. "That's a big step." Kevin nodded. "I know." He leaned forward slightly. "If I'm going to be part of your life long term, I want to do it properly." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. No secrecy. No hiding. Just honesty. Several months later, they traveled to Nigeria together. When Oluchi opened the door and saw her daughter standing there, she immediately pulled Adama into a tight embrace. But when her eyes moved to Kevin standing beside her, curiosity replaced surprise. "And who is this?" Oluchi asked gently. "Mom, this is Kevin." Kevin stepped forward respectfully. "Good afternoon, Ma." Oluchi studied him carefully. There was something about him that felt different immediately. Not just his confidence, his calm. The way he looked at Adama. It wasn't the intense fascination Oluchi had once seen in Daniel's eyes. It was something steadier, something protective. Over the next few days, Kevin spent time with the family. He listened to Oluchi's stories about raising Adama alone. He spoke honestly about his own family and ambitions. He never tried to impress anyone. He simply showed who he was. One evening, as Oluchi and Kevin sat in the living room while Adama prepared tea in the kitchen, Kevin spoke. "I love your daughter." Oluchi remained silent. Kevin continued. "I know she has been through a lot in her life. I don't pretend to understand everything she experienced before we met, but I promise you this." His voice was steady. "I will always treat her with respect." Oluchi looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked one simple question. "Will you protect her when she is too tired to protect herself?" Kevin didn't hesitate. "Yes." The answer came without drama, without hesitation, without performance. And in that moment, Oluchi knew. This man was not chasing her daughter. He was standing beside her. A week later, Kevin officially asked for Adama's hand in marriage. This time, Oluchi smiled. "Yes." The wedding took place months later in Nigeria. It was beautiful. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered to celebrate the union. Music filled the hall, laughter echoed across the decorated space. Adama walked down the aisle wearing a gown that shimmered under the lights. But what made the moment unforgettable was the look on Oluchi's face. Peace. As she watched her daughter step forward to begin a new life, Oluchi felt the weight she had carried for years finally lift. She remembered the hospital room, the sleepless nights raising a child alone, the fear that one mistake might destroy everything. But now, standing there as Kevin gently took Adama's hand, Oluchi knew something important. Her daughter had survived. She had learned. She had grown. And now she was loved the right way. Years later, when Adama and Kevin returned to Canada to continue building their lives, Oluchi stood at the airport watching them leave with quiet pride. Her daughter was no longer the rebellious girl who once laughed at her warnings. She was a woman. And somewhere in the world, Daniel continued living with the consequences of the choices he could never undo. But for Adama, life had finally given her something better than regret. It had given her healing and love that began the right way. Love that is built on secrecy, pressure, or imbalance can leave deep scars that take years to heal. Real love shows itself through patience, respect, protection, and the courage to do what is right. In the end, the people who truly love us guide us toward peace, not pain.
Adama wanted to waste her life. She wanted to throw everything away. If not for the love her mother had for her, she would have been a gone case. Most times, parents, we overlove our kids and we don't teach them what is supposed to be taught. This story is teaching us that you may love your kids and also discipline them. It goes both ways. For you to have a kid that is not going to be a problem in the society, you need to be a parent, a friend, and a teacher. This story is about Oluchi too, Adama's mom. She really gave her best and she pulled through. She tried everything for her daughter to succeed, and she did. Which gets me to say that love is everything we need. So my flowers, thank you for watching this story, and I'll be waiting to hear your comments and your thoughts about the stories in the comment section. See you next time.